All right, today we are going to be taking a look at finding basic percents. So some of the little hints that you need, and sorry about the hole punch there, it says solving for basic percents. The word of tells you to multiply, and you're going to see that in practice here a whole bunch. We change the percent. We've just been doing this. We change the percent to a decimal. And remember, that means if it's like 25%, there's like a decimal point here. We just don't. So we're going to think we're going to divide that by 100. And that means we're going to move the decimal point 2 places that way, which means it's this decimal. So we can see the decimal point went from here to here. So we need to change that percent to a decimal. And then the last step is to multiply, which is what the of might have told us to do. So if we look at this one, it says, what is 65% of 40? So I always tell my kids to take the of and put an X through it, or to make it look like a multiplication symbol. So I know I've got to take 65%, and I'm going to divide that by 100, which means I'm going to move that decimal point over. So now I have my percent as a decimal, and now I'm going to multiply that, and you can use your calculator to do that. I'll also show you some here longhand, and that means 26. So now we also want to think common sense wise. 50% of 40 would be 20. 65% is bigger than 50%, so I want more than 20, so 26 is more than 20. Less than 40, like if I got over 40, that would be over 100%. So just doing some common sense to check your work to see if it makes sense. Our next one is 13%. We're going to take that decimal and slide it over, so that's the decimal 0.13, or 13 hundredths. We're going to multiply, so 0.13 times 75. And I get a decimal as an answer, and that is okay. That would be like if I was trying to find 13% of $75, that would be $9.75. So it's okay to have decimals after there. I know a lot of kids that can throw them off. This next one is 250% of 85. So my decimal point is here. You'll notice when I move this decimal point, it ends up in between two numbers that we already have. It's not less than 1, it's more than 1. So if I'm going to do 250% of this, my answer is going to end up bigger than 85. And in fact, I'm doubling it, and I'm more than doubling it, because I want 2.5 times it. So I get 212.5, or 5/10. Doubling that would have given me 170, so I'm like, okay, that would work. It more than doubles it. So let's take a look at some word problems that you might see with this used. A car company found that 3% of all headlights are defective after 2 months. If they recently received a shipment of 1,350 headlights, approximately how many of these may be defective? So I need to find 3% of 1,350. The of, again, tells me to multiply. When I move this decimal point here, you'll notice that I have a blank space. Remember, I need to fill that in with a 0. So this becomes 0.03 times 1,350. Which gives me that they could expect 40.5. So approximately, because you wouldn't have half of a headlight, 40.5 headlights will be defective. All right, so continuing on to number 2, it says your school newspaper's budget this year is 80% of last year's budget, which was $2,125. So I want 80% of last year's budget. So what is this year's budget? So if I need to cut my budget down to 80% of last year's, I'm going to change this into multiplication, and I want to change this into that decimal. So it's going to be 0.80 or 0.8. Those are the same thing. And when I multiply that, I get $1,700. So that means this year's budget is $1,700. So you know 80% is less than 100%. So I don't have all of last year's budget. I only have 80% of it. So that's less. And I can think too, like 50% would be around $1,075. So I know that I'm over that, so I'm in between those two. So at least I have it, you know, I should be close. Mr. Cross earned $30,000 last year, and he put 10% into his retirement account. He then spent 30% on his mortgage. How much money does he have left over? So if he puts 10% in his retirement, I need 10% of that amount. And then it says he spent 30% on his mortgage, so I'm also going to need 30% of $30,000. Now some of these problems that we're going to see like this, it'll be like, oh, after I take out this much, and then I take 30% of that new amount. This doesn't state that. It just says he spends 30% of this and 10% of this. So the whole time we're going to be using from the 30%. So move my decimal points over. 0.1 times 30,000 and 0.3 times 30,000. 0.1 is going to be $3,000. So we put $3,000 in retirement. That means he put $9,000 down on his mortgage. So that means he spent or used in some way $12,000. So if he made $30,000 and he has spent $12,000 or put it away for safekeeping for retirement, that means he has $18,000 left over, and he would spend that, you know, food, clothing, whatever else he needed, medical. So it's not really left over. I'm sure he's got something to do with it. But there are 600 students in our last question in middle school, made up of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. So 600 students. 25% are in the 6th grade. 1/3 are in the 8th grade. And they're like, well, how many are 7th graders? So this is going to be the same thing as this one. How much is left over? Well, how many students are left over, because they must all be 7th graders. I'm going to change this. So I need 25% of 600, and I need 1/3 of 600. So I move those decimal points over. Remember, we don't usually write that X. I was thinking of doing that. And then 1/3 is going to be a repeating decimal. So you want to put this in your calculator as a repeating decimal, or you can say 1/3 times 600 like this. We aren't going to get partial students. So these, when I multiply, I find out that there are 200 8th graders. And up here, when I do 0.25, 25% is 150. So 200 plus 150 equals 350. So then 600 minus 350 is 250. So there are 250 7th grade students. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me, and hopefully this is helpful.